Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Roughly Chinese. I'm your host Mimi, and today I am joined by two wonderful, insightful guests, Jodie and Kris. Jodie, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Jodie Evans. I'm one of the co-founders of CODEPINK in the United States that, is an anti-war peace organization. And I'm here visiting in Shanghai at this most amazing moment in history.
Yes, absolutely. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you.
And Kris.
And yeah, it's a great pleasure to meet you finally. I used to work for Guancha, and I used to be an editor there. I interviewed your colleague, Tyke Berry, and I do some part-time hosting here with Wave Media. Yeah, so it's a great pleasure to have this conversation.
Cool. I love Guancha.
Yes, so we're with some very important people today, and we're going to get into a very interesting, timely topics that are very important to talk about. Since you just came from California and the United States, maybe we can start literally somewhere close to home. But I was wondering, just what is the state of the US right now? What is happening? Is a civil war going to break out? What's with all the protests? I feel like every few days there's a new one, but they all seem to be quite different, right? So if you would like to give some insight for Chinese people, for non-Chinese people alike, just what's going on the ground?
Okay, so I came from Los Angeles, actually, not just California, but Los Angeles.
That's the episode.
Yes, but the epicenter of what? So it's very funny to hear people in Chinese say, is the U.S. on the verge of, a civil war? What is happening in the streets of Los Angeles? So let's separate everything that's happening to what they're about. What's happening in the streets of Los Angeles is that amazing human beings that are the core of the community, the people that do the hardest work, are being picked up, separated from their children, not separated, torn from their children and put in horrible conditions. And so, Los Angeles is 50% Mexican, Latin American. So, I always say I'm from Mexico because that's the culture of Los Angeles. And so people are watching this happening and they're standing up with their brothers and sisters to say, no, you can't do this.
Right.
And while that is happening, these beautiful thousands of people that are standing in the way of ICE and saying, no, you can't steal our people, complexity is happening. And we've heard from the beginning of the Trump administration that they're going to try to sow violence, make extreme violence happen so that they can bring the National Guard into our cities and occupy us. And so it's confusing because some of the provocateurs are paid for by Trump, just like in Hong Kong, and you can see the similarities. And so here you have provocateurs, which are what the media pays attention to, instead of the beautiful resistance to the violence against these beautiful humans. So Trump wants you to see horrible things happening in the streets of LA so he can bring in the National Guard. The mayor, the governor are saying there's not bad things happening here. There's just the usual protest, and that's fine. We actually respect that it's happening, and because the federal government is being violent. Mm-hmm. And so it's getting blown out of proportion by the media, and it's super complex. I want to say that, Los Angeles just experienced some horrible fires on both sides of the city where 150,000 people were displaced from their homes. So it's also happening at the time where Los Angeles has come together to take care of itself. So care of humanity is very core to how we are behaving as Angelenos right now. And so this is really when you're out there in the streets being with the people, it's beautiful. It's humanity caring for itself. And it's being, co-opted by the media to drive another agenda, just like we see the media driving us to wars, the media being used, right now with what's happening with Israel and Iran. So we have to be able to look at what's really happening, which is beautiful. Yeah. That we must stand for the people, as we do with Palestine, as we do with Gaza, as we speak out, even though we're punished, to say, no, you can't be starving people. No, you can't be murdering people. It's like what we need to do as humanity always.
Absolutely. And I think one of the most moving things, I think, for me when I saw the marches is that so many people were not only holding up the flags from their respective countries, but the Palestinian flag was such a core part of these protests because they're connecting the dots that US imperialism not only drives people out of their home countries, but is also creating a genocide, has conducted a genocide, and is continuing to in Palestine. And so I kind of want to parallel that or compare that to another protest that's happening in the United States, because some people are connecting those dots, but I think others are just only pinpointing the Trump administration, which is, I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, what the recent No Kings protest was more pointed towards. It was very much pointed towards the king in question, which is Trump, and blaming him for all the shit that's gone down in the US or the civil unrest and everything, and for ICE. But it's not just Trump, is it? It's the entire system as a whole. It's what it was built on. It's the Democrats too. But I think for me, and what I've been seeing in terms of the Chinese perspective, is that what is that protest, the No Kings protest, what is that about? What is the complexity there?
So just to be clear, it wasn't a protest, it was a march. So it was a very calm, peaceful, people just out with their signs, articulating a contradiction to what the Trump administration is being, very much driven by the Democratic Party liberals. So not even a lot of talk about ICE, I want to say. It was a lot, it's a lot about choice. It was more about just the authoritarianism that people are afraid of that's happening. It's not about Palestine. It wasn't about stop the war on Iran. Code Pink shows up at those with that messaging, but we're not marching with them because it's very tame, very liberal, very, it's, and also to divide, it's to keep reminding people that's them, you're different, even when you're not really different, even when you've accepted a genocide against the Palestinians, even when Biden and Obama, were just as bad on immigration, even when, so it's complex. Certainly what is happening out of the Trump administration is authoritarianism on steroids. Definitely they've taken it past a comfort zone, which is waking some people up. But at the beginning of the Trump administration, they actually had more people in the streets on the march that happened the first time around. So on Saturday, they predict there were somewhere between 8 and 11 million people in about 2,100 different marches. But those marches were very tame. They had messages that represent the Democratic messaging versus the Republican messaging. It was on Trump's birthday, let's remember, when he was doing a military march that he's always wanted to do, that we stopped the first time around. But it was, and so instead of addressing the military march, they just made it about them. And Code Pink, 12 Code Pinkers were the only protest at the military march in DC. Even the No Kings march, they didn't have one in DC. So is it really against Trump, or is it really a performative about who we are and please be with us? But there were 12 people, Code Pink people, outside the military march saying, fund communities, not war. Make out, not war. 60% of US taxpayers' hard-earned money invest in the military-industrial fascist genocidal complex. And nobody on the Democratic Party is stopping that. So it's interesting that that message was missing in those marches that were not protests, they were marches.
So precise. Thank you, Jodie. Very, very precise. Kris, you.
It's kind of, yeah. I mean, it's this reminds me of the song of Ice and Fire in Los Angeles. ICE, yeah. But it's also, does he have an element of court intrigue? I mean, is that a secretive power struggle between Governor Newsom and Trump?
Not secretive at all. No,
Okay,
I mean,
it's
are you
open.
kidding?
It's an open feud.
I mean, of course, I mean,
Does he,
Newsom wants to be president after
okay.
Trump.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
So he's positioning himself as the fighter, you know, like here I am, da-da-dum, you know, against Trump.
Yeah.
But also, I just want to, for Newsom, this is his politics. He's not somebody that would allow ICE to come in and steal people. I mean, he does have a value system that he's operating out of, and the theater is also helping him position himself as a fighter against Trump. You know, that's how the theater should play out in the Democratic Republican theater that rocks the American people to sleep while both of them do the same thing. So, you know, why did Trump win? Was because enough Democrats saw that the Democratic Party was a lie and that it really wasn't what it pretended to be. That's why Trump won. Now, it still creates its theater, even though it hasn't learned its lessons. It's also not a party. It's a corporation. So the Democratic Party is really a corporation that serves the shareholders. And those shareholders are US elites and corporations. It does not serve the people, even though it pretends to serve the people. So the people at the bottom, the people that, you know, have been there, shown up, been, you know, pulled in to vote for the Democratic Party, many of them went, oh, I've been lied to, you're not going to yank my chain again. So people are seeing that, you know, as they say, the emperor has no clothes, or, you know, the Wizard of Oz, the curtains are pulled back on the Wizard of Oz. That is happening. And Trump is even pulling those curtains back more. It's not like authoritarianism hasn't existed in the United States. It's not like black leadership hasn't been murdered by the United States government because it was exposing the violence of the empire. But the empire is in it's failing. The empire is in its last stages. So its violence is against its people is going to get more extreme. And Trump really is exposing that, which is helping people see what has always been there. I mean, my entire life, the violence of the empire has been, I've seen it, but most liberals get rocked to sleep by the propaganda of the US propaganda machine of mainstream media. And they, you know, just like with the Israel, you know, with Zionism right now, there's the Jewish people that stand in the street against what's happening in Gaza because they see behind the violence of Zionism. And there's the Jews that have been rocked to sleep by Zionism and think it's a good thing. I mean, when you're steeped in what I say, the toxicity of propaganda, you're living in an upside down world and you don't have a ground. So you're always, I say it goes in and it hooks the very best of humanity to be used by the very worst goals of power. And so, you know, it's just a lot of that going on. The propaganda of the US military-industrial complex goes for a very long time.
I mean, I like your point about the Democrat Party being a corporation, is not being a real party, but I wonder if the same can be said of the Republican Party, because you see Trump was, of course, both parties are brought over by money, but also Trump has a lot of popular support from the grassroots. That's why people call it the populist president. And then people who are sick and tired of the forever wars going on, they want U.S. to draw back and stop caring about whatever is going on overseas with those military bases. So there are genuine people who care more about the homeland security, the closed borders, so illegal immigrants go home, and they ask, are those people in California documented immigrants? Are they illegal immigrants? On what grounds are they in California? So, and because I read some online comments. Of course, you can say the comments are, censored by YouTube, but they're actually people from other states of the United States who say, okay, Californian people are just an exception of the Americans. So we, people from other states, the red states, we want the immigrants just illegal immigrants to go out. And that's why we voted for Trump. And how do you respond to that message?
It's more propaganda.
Yeah.
So the propaganda, so like choice, immigration is used to divide the country. And in the same way that people are used by making enemies of countries that the US wants to go to war on, immigration is used as a tool to separate the country and build power. It's all lies. They're being used by lies. Now, do you know that Trump had to pull back because the farmers and the business restaurant owners went to Trump and said, you're destroying our businesses because these are our best workers.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
Yeah.
So the United States couldn't function without these immigrants because what happens? The United States goes to Latin America and Mexico, undermines its economy, and the people who are at the bottom have to come to the United States. It's their only, I mean, these people are the most beautiful people you've ever met, who serve like in the most beautiful ways. There aren't people in America that don't love who they are because they come with no other opportunity for themselves and their families but to come and do the hardest jobs. They're the hardest workers with just the most beautiful hearts. And even the farmers, even the restaurant owners, even the capitalists are going, Trump, stop. You're destroying our businesses by doing this. Now, that doesn't mean there's not problems in who's coming. But those are also created by the United States. Those are also about the United States drug problem and how that creates an underground criminal, but that's been true since, prohibition. When you try to prohibit this thing, it creates crime. But who has suffered is Mexico, Colombia, El Salvador. Like, who suffers are the countries in Latin America. And so, yes, is there a criminal gang apparatus it's this much. Okay. But it's been created by the United States. That drama is cultivated and created by the United States, by the United States drug culture that's created by an empty society, an empty culture that is not taking care of its people. The United States is not taking people out of poverty. It's putting people into poverty. Exactly. And when you are in poverty, a very painful place to be, drugs are a way to deal with the situation. So it's super complicated. But to think that a person in Nebraska has they've been taught to hate them because it's been taught that they hate you. And that's also propaganda.
And I think, like, if we really want to trace back, truly, the real illegal immigrants of the United States are those who went and killed all the Native Americans, right? If we really trace it back. It is stolen land, you know? And I do feel like the whole question of whether illegal or not illegal, I think we should actually look at like the US's lawmaking policies, you know, and what they're grounded in, and whether the US acts legally 99% of the time, and how they have, like you said, eroded, corrupted, underdeveloped, genocided so many global South nations where these immigrants are coming from, which I'm going to use this to pivot to what is happening in real time, and how the US is continuing to do that right now in Palestine alongside its favorite friend, Israel. What they're doing to Palestine, as well as what they're doing to Iran, right? Which has developed over the last few days, or escalated more over the last few days, but really has been in the works for decades, you know? So I'd love to open this conversation about what's happening in Iran as well as Palestine. And maybe let's start with the Freedom Flotilla that was, you know, embarking to bring humanitarian aid to Palestinian people, who was just bringing food, sanitary pads, toilet paper, basic human necessities to Palestine, and was, of course, violently stopped, detained, arrested, deported, all of that, just for bringing food and blankets and water, you know, really making an obvious statement that they have been making. We don't want Palestinian people to live. We don't want them to survive, right? So the Freedom Flotillas that were embarking to Palestine, that then became the March to Gaza. Now, Jodie, would you like to speak on this? Because I know you're involved and deeply a part of it. So.
Okay, but can I back up a little bit?
Of course. So let's go back.
Because to speak about it without like talking about the kind of structure, I've been working to free Palestine for over 50 years. So this isn't, you know, this is a long process and a problem of US imperialism. And when you say the friend of the United States, Israel, Israel and the United States are not separate.
Right.
They are one thing.
Right.
And Israel was created by England and the United States as their base in the Middle East. This is the Crusades still, okay? This is white people against people of color. So let's start with this as a racist agenda, white people against brown people. And thinking that they dehumanize anyone that's not white is the first crime. So let's just start there. So this is something I've been working on for a very long time, because watching the violence against, again, the most beautiful people. For me, it's like the immigrants, where they're just peace economy, where they literally give of their life to help other people. This is the Palestinians, have a beautiful culture that is rich in you know, in peace. And what the Middle East, like I went to the Middle East in the 70s, and I really got to witness the generosity. Like, no matter how little you had, I was taken in and given to.
Yeah.
I witnessed a peace economy culture in Lebanon, in Iran, in Iraq in the 70s. So, so here you have these beautiful people that just want to live their lives and take care of their kids. And what continues is US and British imperialist violence. Okay, so let's start there. When Code Pink first started, and I want to say why we're called Code Pink, is that what Bush was frightening the American people into war with color-coded alerts, orange, red, and yellow. So every day in the newspaper was how frightened you should be of and code red of Iraq.
Wow.
Who had done nothing. Iraq had done nothing, had nothing to do with 9/11. It's a secular society, has nothing to do with ISIS, has nothing to do, nothing. A totally innocent country. A war is being manufactured by Bibi using, you know, hiding behind Bush, a war in an innocent country. So we called Code Pink for peace and tried to tell everybody the truth about what was happening, but nobody would listen, because the New York Times is manufacturing consent for a war in Iraq. A war that has, the war on terror has killed 4.5 million people in the Middle East in these 22 years. I'm going to say that again. It has killed 4.5 million people that nobody went to jail for, nothing happened, no accountability, no responsibility. You know who went to jail? Chelsea Manning, Julian Assange. You know, the whistleblowers of what was happening went to jail, but not the people torturing, murdering, killing, lying. Okay, so there we are. At the beginning of Code Pink, we went to Iraq. We walked across the desert from Jordan, knocked on the door, and said, you know, we're here to be able to go home and say what's actually happening. My partner, Medea Benjamin, the co-founder of Code Pink, they took her passport and said, Benjamin, oh, you're Jewish. And she said, yes. And he walks out of the room and we're like, oh dear. He comes back with a book in Hebrew and says, what does this say? And she said, I don't know how to speak Hebrew. That's, you know, but why are you trying to speak Hebrew? He said, well, when we were at war with Iran, I learned how to speak Farsi, the language of my enemy. And now Israel's going to war on us. I want to learn their language. So that's what Iraq looks like: kindness, humanity, generosity. So we went in, and on the way back out, we went to Israel and marched with the Women for Peace, Jewish, Christian, Muslim women, and we got tear gassed. So that's how long Code Pink has been. So then BB in 2000, between Bush and Obama, it's called the lame duck period, between the election and when Obama took over, BB did occupation, you know, bombed Gaza and killed a couple thousand people, bombed hospitals and schools. And so the next year, we took 1,000 people to Gaza in 7 trips to see what was really happening, because nobody knew, right? To come back and tell the stories. And I can tell you, you know, I took a lot of Jewish friends that came back and they couldn't talk for a month because to realize how lied to they'd been and how horrible Israel had been to these people, and like they were really ashamed. And so, and then we had the Gaza Freedom March, where we took 1,500 people. We met in Cairo, just like right now, to go to the Rafah border and go into Gaza and, you know, have a march with the Gazans. And we were stopped in Cairo. Now we got another 250 through because I was friends with Mrs. Mubarak, who loved peace, and she was the head of the Red Crescent. So we had like, I think 8 trucks full of aid, and so we got 250 in, which was all she could get in, which is she had done for that last year. And so then there's, you know, the square, the uprising in Egypt, they get rid of Mubarak, and they, you know, the Brotherhood take over, and Israel can't have the Brotherhood in power in Egypt because it's connected to Gaza, and it's going to open the Rafah border. So what do? They come in and put an authoritarian Sisi into power in Egypt that works for Israel and the United States. So just to contextualize what we're working with.
Yep.
So after the Gaza Freedom March, then a lot of the people create the Flotilla. And like a lot of Code Pinkers are on the first Flotilla, which is, I believe, like 9 boats. And the first boat gets attacked, 9 people get killed. Israel gets on board and kills 9 innocent aid delivery people. So let's just remember, this happened in 2010.
Where were they from? Those
Turkey.
Turkey.
Yeah, it was Turkish ship. Yeah, they were from Turkey. And the Turkish government has tried to get, you know, Israel for it all those years. So it's just to remind you that nobody stood in the way of the violence. If we don't stand in the way of the violence, it continues and escalates. So every year there's an attempt, a flotilla, to take aid and support to Gaza. Every year it gets stopped. People get arrested, sent back. You know, Ann Wright from Code Pink, she's our board member, Colonel Ann Wright, that resigned from the US government around Iraq because she could no longer represent this violent government. And so she's very much the Code Pink member in the Flotilla, has been on all of them. She and Tig were, recently in the Flotilla that got stopped, that got droned by Israel and stopped in Malta, sorry. So out of the group in Malta that was hundreds, 12 of them committed to go on a sailboat. The Madleen, that included Greta Thunberg, and which is an interesting thing to listen to Greta, because Greta, as a young woman, 17 years old, got lifted up by the liberal, environmental movement as the voice, to speak. And Greta, as soon as she speaks out for Palestine, radio silence.
Yeah, exactly.
So, right? Like, nobody's going to talk about her because, oh dear, you're supporting the Palestinian people. We can't listen to you anymore. But really, it was Greta's coming of age, having the curtains open for her to see the violence of the people she was associated to who weren't speaking out for the Palestinians. So she gets more and more vocal as the days go on, to where she's willing to risk her life. Now, this is serious. Those 12 people on that sailboat knew. When you watch what they do to Gaza, they don't care about aid work. Matter of fact, if you help Palestinians, there's a target on your back. They don't care about you. They want to kill you. Yeah. They want to kill everyone that is for anything beautiful. Yeah. So these 12 people, talk about courage. To go back out there in the middle of the ocean towards Gaza, I mean, you had no idea if you were going to live through this.
Absolutely.
Just, you had to take that choice.
Yeah.
So then they stop it, they take everybody, lie, put the French people in jail. I mean, the same thing we've been through every time. But we were ready with the follow-up was going to be the march, which is, out of the Flotilla movement, the leadership, definitely part of the Flotilla movement. And so then the march, all of this is very important, because to get close, to have courage, instills courage in others. So why 12 people? Because it doesn't take a million. And why Greta? Because it made that story go viral.
Right.
It made people in the world see the courage of these people and say, oh, I need to be doing something. So whatever you choose to do, just don't be silent, right?
Yeah.
So it inspires everybody that's worn out from so much violence that they just want to be a puddle of tears.
Right.
That, is looking at a level of inhumanity that's unfathomable, that we should never have to see, that, attacks our very psyches, right? Who are these people that can be this insane? So it really is nourishment, right? It's nourishment to Palestinians. I don't care who it nourishes outside of Palestine. The fact that the Palestinians feel not alone is the most important thing. That the people in Gaza feel there's someone crossing the water to help them. You have no idea what that means to somebody left alone and now in the dark.
Totally.
Now that lights have been turned off, we have no idea what's happening. So the march is the next level. That's thousands of people from 50 countries that are making their way to Cairo to cross the Sinai Desert to bring aid, right? Another level of what can we do? You have to step up. You have to go to the place. Well, here's another group. I'm taking care of the 33 that are going for CODEPINK. And every time I talk to them, I just thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm blown away by who you are, by your courage, by your willingness, by your passion. Thank you. And the first day they were there, when they were trying to cross the checkpoints, people got beat up, their passports got taken, they got kicked out of the country, all kinds of things happened. Not a one of them complained. They were just okay, what's next?
Keep going.
And it took, it took 12 hours to find everybody. I'm, nervous for a while. What happened? Where are they? Everybody got back to their hotel rooms, and there's 6 of them that are almost that have made it past all the checkpoints. So people are everywhere, but committed. Here I am. Won't be stopped by Israel. I am for the Palestinian people. So it's a very real thing that then they're telling their stories online and people get to feel it. And so this morning, when they wake up on Monday morning in the United States, there's a march to the Egyptian embassy in DC, and there's a march in San Francisco, there's a march in LA. There's people picking up the baton to march in the cities of the United States to say, let's not forget Palestine, even though it's dark. You know, we are marching for feeding the people, you know, like just the simplest messages of we can't let this go, even though it's been darkened, and even though it's been distorted, or, you know, what's happening is, let's talk about a war parade in DC, let's talk about a stupid Trump-Musk fight, let's talk about Iraq, but still what's happening is the violent murder of people in Gaza.
Right.
So that's why we say, that's why we are doing this. You can't let all the circus distract you. The thing is here, the thing is now.
Yeah.
Stay with what is happening in the moment. And so right now, the marchers in Cairo, like some of them are going home because of the destabilization of the Middle East and not sure what's happening. Some of them are leaving now because, like, who knows what's going to happen? Maybe I can't fly out of the Cairo airport. Some of them are moving further. So all of them are courageous. All of them have stood up, and it's really humbling to be in their presence. And even two of them that couldn't go because they're like, one the wife and one the husband said, no, you can't go, you know, like, so you know what they're doing? They're at home working 24 hours a day, taking care of the people that are in Cairo. So it's a community. Like when they went, they care for each day. They're always finding where they are. What do you need? It's a community of care at the core.
Yeah.
What is happening right now globally?
Yeah.
Is they're trying to erase our hearts from taking care of each other. And at the core of what we have to do, all of us globally, is take care of each other. And where are the people that need, and how do we show up for them? And it's very different everywhere. You know, I say to anyone, it's like, just talk about it. Because they're trying to make us be silent. Just show up with what you know. Share from your heart. Just don't be silent.
I think in China, the stories are obviously all reaching China, and we kind of talked about this briefly before, but Greta didn't have the best reputation in China exactly because she was co-opted by these liberal NGOs, right? And placing these liberal ideas onto her and making her a figurehead of speech, right? Of just talking. But with everything
using her.
Using her.
Because she had a huge following in the youth.
Exactly.
That's why they co-opt people. Let me just remind you that why they co-opt people is because they have a following. Why do they have a following? Because they're authentic and they're telling the truth.
Yes.
So what power does is it co-opts it and it brings it in and uses it. Right. So just making sure we know why.
Thank you. And no, I think that's a very important point. And I think Greta, in her action, right, has stood for everything that she's spoken about before and has shown the people how authentic she is, how real she is. And I think Chinese people have seen this now and been like, oh, we really respect what's going on. Because I think for China, at least, there's been no question about humanitarian aid. You know, humanitarian aid from China has constantly been poured into Gaza. And especially online, I see so many videos of, you know, UN speeches that the Palestinian representative makes, or even the Chinese representative makes, about how this is a genocide and it's wrong. And then on top of that, with the humanitarian aid, why wouldn't you let Palestinian people eat and sleep and have water? You know, like, I think Chinese people don't understand that, or I would say differently, understand that so well because Chinese people experienced that with the Japanese invasion in China. And so I've seen online a lot of comparisons with what's happening in Gaza to how the Japanese people treated Chinese people like less than a century ago. So yeah, Kris, if you'd like to elaborate on that and your perspective, the Chinese perspective on the flotilla, the march, Gaza.
Yeah. I mean, everything you said was beautiful. I mean, the struggle is beautiful, especially it's a beauty in the face of utterly ugly. And you mentioned that it's silent. all across the so-called official, propaganda mouthpiece in the West. But the things are different in China. I mean, especially when you look at social media, people talk about Gaza, people talk about Palestine, Israel and Iran, the struggle broadly on a day-to-day basis, because there are commentators like me. We talk about this on the Chinese internet, and people are quite informed on this issue. Just to add on the Greta Thunberg point, I think you mentioned that Chinese people weren't, probably some are still not a fan of hers. That's because she was representing this environmental protection and everything. People saw that as you mentioned, the cause that's co-opted by the liberals, and I think she came across to me as very genuine. She was a genuine personality. I never doubted that she was putting up a show just for her fame or whatever. I thought no. But she was sometimes they call it in the West, in US, people say it's degrowth. Okay, environmentalism for degrowth, stop growing. And Chinese people, we are especially sensitive to that because, well, you see, the West, you developed, you had industrial revolution, your standard of living is up there. We Chinese people, we are not subhumans. We also want to have our decent life. So we also have our right to develop, to be industrialized. And then if a girl from Sweden, a post-industrial country, tells you, okay, you don't carbon emission. Okay, you just stop. And then, of course, she adopted her way of life, a very green way of life. Okay, stop taking planes or whatever. And people are asking, okay, so you want us to be stuck in a position where we can't have that attain the level of standard as the West. We Chinese people are still humans, so that's why a lot of people have an issue with her. And nowadays she stands up for Palestine, and people think, okay, so you really care about people. And to me, I think she never changed. I mean, she cares.
Yeah.
She cares whether it's for the environment, whether it's for people. I mean, she has a good conscience. Like Putin. Putin also said, okay, she's a sincere girl, but she was a bit naive. I think that was Putin's comment.
Well, but to
her.
be fair, when I say when you grow up in an empire, you're stupid. So to be fair, she grew up in a white country, Western.
Sure.
So my husband would say she should know better, but she doesn't. And she's learning. And I think we have to be patient with people because of the complexity of the propaganda that Western people are steeped in. And they should know better, but they are raised in racist tropes, in Western tropes, in imperialist thinking, and they don't even know it. They don't think about others. They don't think about Africa or Latin America or China or Asia or what. I mean, if an American had to think about the level of violence that has been expressed from their country, I don't think they'd be able to sleep at night, most of them. Because I don't know how they would reconcile it with the idea they have of themselves. They can't even deal with the genocide and slavery that is underneath, that is literally the soil of who they are. They stand on the shoulders, that the comfort they live on is on the bones of Black and Indigenous peoples that they still are in denial about. So the rest of it is, way out there. But yeah, I think the environmental movement is a very naive movement that is also very infiltrated by the corporations that they're trying to stop. We call it greenwashing.
Yeah.
So I mean, I was part of the movement in the late 60s where we were 20 million people in the streets that changed the government and got all the things in place like the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, all of that, which was important. But since then, it's been co-opted by the corporations that want to control it so it doesn't get in their way. So degrowth is a way the corporations have it like in another puddle over there, playing with itself, instead of really taking on the corporations that are the problem. And not understanding that all the peoples of the world should be allowed to develop, like Western culture has been allowed to develop after it's, no one will catch up with the amount of destruction to the climate that the Western world has already unleashed from hundreds of years.
And with bombs.
And with bombs, for sure. The greatest contributor to climate change is war. And people don't talk about that. We have a campaign. We have a campaign at CODEPINK called War is Not Green, and it shows that the greatest contributor to climate change is war and weapons. But in the Paris agreements from COP, the United States was able to get that pushed under the rug. So if those numbers were used, the US would always be the worst. So it got it ignored so it could look better than China. I mean, we live in a transition time in history, and we're all going to have to unlearn and learn, and our responsibility is to think critically, especially with AI happening. It's like, it's a nice tool, and please don't lose your critical thinking. Please, use the tool. Don't let the tool use you, as we say. And critical thinking is super important, and that we all have to do. We all have to think beyond the moment, into history, into the historical conditions that have created the situation, into the propaganda that has, the toxicity that has poisoned minds that are young. When you're young, you are naive. You don't understand how the world works. You can be used. And that's why, power targets young with a following to be used. So she's got a lot to learn, but I think she's learning a lot very quickly. And because she's really smart and authentic, I think, we'll see more from her about how do we talk about. I hope we see more from her taking on just the military-industrial complex, more than degrowth, because if you could get rid of the military-industrial complex and leave everyone to live in peace, because weapons end up being used. They have a use-by date, which was right now. We have to be definitely working on what are the underpinnings of power. We're looking at what happens in inequality, what happens in unchecked power, and it's very serious. It is an empire that has been unchecked. The people who are violent and driving it have been unchecked. There is no accountability or responsibility, and there's certainly no commitment to peace. And that is a problem the whole world needs to be dealing with right now.
And I think there is a difference in terms of political culture between China and United States and the West in general. Because this class of activists or activism is absent in China. We don't have activists in her sense in China. So when you talk about,
but I disagree with you.
Okay,
so it's just plays out differently.
Yeah.
Because it was the people in China that got the clean air.
Yeah.
Why? Because they complained. So here's the thing. I come to China and I watch people complain very well. They actually get what they want. I say to Americans, Chinese actually complain a lot and they get. But we live in a country where you get nothing. You complain and complain and complain and get nothing.
That's precisely my point. I mean, this government or the state is actually acting responsibly to respond to the complaints.
Right.
So you don't have a permanent class of people going there protesting on the streets. That's my point. So people like seeing that happening time and again in the West and say, okay, so you guys are talking, but you talk the talk, but never walk the walk. So that comes across as someone disingenuous. So people started to doubt, are you just profiting from this showmanship or something like that? How what's the business model? So people, whenever I say Greta, say, what's your business model? It's different in China.
It's so funny that you're saying this because I just had this conversation with a friend. I'm almost going to cry thinking about it. So she has a activist organization that teaches people how to be activists.
Okay.
And I said to her, wouldn't it be cool if you didn't have to do that? Because like when I'm in China, I'm dancing in the park and people have all these hobbies and they go home after work and they sing and, you know, play games. And imagine a world where you didn't have to be an activist. She said, well, what if you needed to change the government? Like, I watch Chinese people change the government all the time. So, but it's not their job. It's as citizens talking about what needs to happen to a government that's accountable and responsible. And I was so sad for my friend. I was like, I want to live a life where I don't have to be an activist. I want to be playing my harp. I want to be dancing. I want to be singing. I want to be making my ceramics. But instead, as a responsible person inside of the belly of the beast, I can't stop. First of all, because there's not a lot of us. It gets smaller and smaller every year, and it's going to get smaller and smaller inside the fascism. Because today I talk to my friends, they get fired. My girlfriend is a doctor in a university tenure. She got fired for saying, we have to feed the people in Palestine. My girlfriend, who's a musician,
Anti-Semitic.
the grandniece of Ravi Shankar just lost her job because she posted, we need to feed the people in Palestine. So activism is going to keep shrinking. But the people in the United States don't even know what it is to live, to have a life of where you go to work and you do your job and then you have a life. You know, the activists are so, but when you say, well, first of all, I've never made a dollar being an activist. I've never been paid to be an activist. Activism is what we do to try to get in the way of the violence of our government as a responsible citizen. But I have been an activist against war since 1968. I haven't changed my government one iota. I have not moved it. I mean, the military-industrial complex continues to grow, and the people continue to get dumber. When I was in the streets in the 68, I had a much bigger contingency. When I was in the streets to try to stop nuclear weapons, and we actually did do something, it was, you know, millions of us. That number gets smaller, and it gets more co-opted, and it gets more infiltrated. So, you know, being in the streets in Ferguson after, you know, police killings, half of the people in the streets were funded by the US government, were infiltrators. So it's not a safe thing to be. I'm being attacked in the United States because they want to shut me up.
Yeah, I've heard stories.
Yeah, they ran an article that I'm funded by the CCP. Like, really? I'm not funded by anyone. I've been doing the same thing for 55 years of my life. I've always been for peace. Nobody needs to pay me to do this. This is what I do with my life.
Yep.
How insulting that you would say that somebody, anybody, who cares who, that anyone would have to pay me to use my life to stand against violence. But oh, you know, we've got to shut her up because, you know, guess what? Actually, since I started China's Not Our Enemy, the campaign, 5% drop in the people that think China's not our enemy, that think China's our enemy. 5% drop in people hating China. So better shut that woman up.
You're doing exactly what
they're
they
spending
fear.
billions of dollars to get people to hate China, and I'm actually being effective to getting people not to hate China.
They're scared.
They're scared.
They're shaking.
We can't have that. You know, we're spending billions of dollars and you're getting in our way. So it's like they have been shutting up people who get in their way for a very, very long time.
Which China doesn't do, you know? China responds to errors or mistakes or dissatisfactions of the people, and yet the US heralds itself as the most democratic when things that you have been on the streets about since the 60s have still not changed, because what they're doing to Gaza is what they did to Vietnam, right? Exactly. Which you were also in the streets for. Yeah. So I'm going to move to the next topic, which is...
But also, I ran a presidential campaign in 1992 to get money out of politics. So let's just talk about democracy, which is get misused around the United States. You can't have a democracy in inequality, especially when you're saying elections are a democracy. So the campaign, it was on a $100 limit. The only message of the campaign was, if you don't get money out of politics, it doesn't matter what you care for because the money will win, which is what we live in right now. And people are used by this idea that we have a democracy, even when it never gives them what they need, even as poverty gets worse, even as homelessness gets worse. You know, they're so battered, and the 3.5% that have everything is what they want and think is possible, the American dream, that they keep looking up at this possibility and not recognizing the horror that they actually live in, the violence to life that it actually is, that people, I mean, look, I look at my grandkids and I just like can't believe the level of anxiety they live in. I mean, that's a crime. To cause this much anxiety in the people of your country. But I say, you know, one of the things Trump does is like just keeps everybody in anxiety all the time. And that's, you can't live your life out of that much anxiety. You know, a little conflict is important to grow, as nature teaches us. That's healthy, a little conflict. But when conflict goes at a different level, when it's an anxiety and that's all you're living out of, it's not useful to life, it's devastating to life. It creates diseases, creates inflammation in your body, it creates an alienation to each other. In the United States, 70% of young people are alienated from each other, even as they think they're connected. You know, I teach that there's a war economy. I call capitalism the war economy, the extractive, destructive, oppressive economy killing you, your community, and the planet. And then there's a peace economy, the giving, sharing, caring, thriving, relational, resilient economy without which none of us would be alive. It is the economy, socialism, that is about care of each other. It is literally a culture. An economy means the making of home. Capitalism is destroying home. Socialism cultivates a home where we can all feel we're cared for, that lessens anxiety and allows us to grow and flourish in life, allows us even to be here, living life. Not, I mean, when I see the people that I'm up against in the streets, I call them Zionist zombies, because they're literally alive but not. They've been owned by violence and hate. So it's hard, I think, for Chinese to understand how the culture of the United States and how it's violent to its own people in a way that is really, really sad. And it's hard for people in the United States to understand. They've been told they live in the best country in the world. To understand that there could be something more beautiful, more nourishing, more nurturing. But you know, when the TikTok debacle happened, you know, people made it like it was about China. It was really about Palestine. Why were they trying to close down TikTok? Was because the young people were actually learning the truth about Palestine. It had been closed down in Twitter, had been closed down on Facebook, but you could actually learn the truth in TikTok. So they were closing it down really about Palestine. But what it did, it opened up all these people that got on Red Note. Oh my God. It was so beautiful to watch the people in America go, oh my God, look at China. we've been lied to. Look, and they're talking about things and they're learning, like, really? So it's opening up. People are finding the way through the cracks to find the truth because the curtains are exposing the violence, because they're looking for truth.
And I think because of that cross-cultural exchange, the perspective about America has also shifted in China, right? Because I think, of course, China has such a revolutionary history, and Mao Zedong was so clear about what U.S. imperialism is. Mao Zedong knew exactly what Israel was. It's like what Taiwan is for us. It's a hub of imperialism, right? I feel like that's been clear in our history, but the propaganda of the U.S. is so strong, and the Western propaganda is so strong, and they're bullies. Yeah. So naturally, people will, believe, oh, okay, they talk about democracy a lot. Maybe they are democratic, or maybe they are, for a while they were extremely developed, and, because I think of a reaction in the Cold War, showing that they could provide social services, whatever. So China has also shifted now after seeing these protests, after seeing everything about Palestine. It's also been an awakening here where it's like, wait, the US isn't what it says it is as well. And I think with everything that's happened recently, it's been eye-opening for the whole world to what the US really is. So now I'm going to move on to the next topic, which is completely related to everything we were talking about how now Israel is attacking Iran and Iran's response. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings?
Horror, fear, anger. After the U.S. attacked the innocent country, Iraq, Medea, my partner that I started CODEPINK with, we wrote a book called Stop the Next War Now, because we weren't able to stop the war in Iraq. And so all our efforts, really, if you would say, for the last 22 years have been around stopping the war in Iran, because that was really the next target of Bibi. He just wants to get rid of Iran. In the meantime, we've watched him be successful at destroying Libya, Syria, really doing great damage to Lebanon. And so it was just, we knew that Iran is in the targets. We've been watching this, kind of very frightened. But to watch it happen the same day as they blocked all information coming out of Gaza, so as a distraction, and then to see them hit, 3 layers of leadership inside of Iran, like literally take the head off of Iran, and realize it was because they'd infiltrated and owned the intelligence officer. And that we have watched Bibi lie since, I can remember, since 2001. Because I think he was deciding whether to go after Iran or Iraq, saying that they had weapons of mass destruction. In 1 year, Iran's going to have a nuclear weapon, and 2 years, he has been saying this for 23 years, 24 years that I've been listening to. So this is propaganda that he has been using forever. And he uses it in the same way. It's like, how do we make everyone hate and be afraid of Iran? What has Iran done to anybody? What has Iran done to anyone? It's not so great to its people, but, women. But it's not doing what the United States imperialism is doing to the rest of the world. So this is what he uses to go after. His megalomaniac control the entire Middle East. Watching it happen, I have to say, is just, I've been to Tehran so many times, and I love it so much. And, that we have all these international laws that are being violated. Every law has been violated every day for the last, 630 days. But Congress has, U.S. weapons, U.S. Jets, killing, bombing an apartment building inside of Tehran full of innocent people? Where are we? What does this mean? It's the opening of Pandora's box that you can't close that frightens me to death. But to keep using this lie and then say it was a premeditated, we got that our chain yanked about that with a rock. Everybody knew it was a lie. The fact that the world gets their chain yanked by that same lie again, I mean, please, people. But if you're an American and you're watching this, they called Putin's war on Ukraine unprovoked, fully provoked by the United States. But you're watching a literal unprovoked war on Iran, and the U.S. military the U.S. media is all for it.
Of course.
It's so racist.
Yeah.
It's so imperialist that what happened to sovereign countries? Like what happened? Palestinians are the terrorists, and and the United States is the land of the free and the home of the brave. I mean, the upside down nature of this is what's frightening, because you're creating a contortion of reality that if people don't know, they get used by. That's what's frightening.
Right.
And it's frightening. What's frightening from the very first day when I saw babies killed in incubators, like week 1 in Gaza, is to understand that nobody can stop this because Israel has nuclear weapons and they will use them. People in the United States argue that you can win a nuclear war. That is frickin' insanity. But the fact that there are psychopathic people that believe that is frightening. And so everybody's like, well, why aren't the countries in the Middle East? Why isn't China and Russia coming to the defense of the Palestinians? Israel has nuclear weapons. And it only takes a few, and the entire, talk about climate change. Obliterate the planet. So there are actual wise people in power in some countries that know better than to provoke a nuclear war, that are trying to think, how do we stop this in a way that doesn't, because Bibi Netanyahu is ready to take the whole world down with him. U.S. empire is dying. It is ready to take the whole world down with it. So, there are real consequences. Like watching pagers blow up leadership of Lebanon. That is the most sick stuff. That is sick. These people are sick. And that's evil. And that is, we do have to figure out how to stop it. And it is going to be people power. And it is going to be people saying this is not okay. Because it is Zionists, imperialists are inside of power structures everywhere. Everywhere. Yeah. And it is going to be up to those who can see the truth. And it's a very simple truth. How do we serve life? Is this serving life? This is serving death at every level. This is irresponsible, immoral, internationally illegal. And even if those structures aren't in the way of you, we have to keep holding it, each of us.
Absolutely. And Iran has the absolute right to defend itself. And I think, like you said, the word war, right, is really important when it comes to this, because what mainstream media paints this out to be is the war of the region, a regional war. But what is obviously really happening is that Israel is an aggressor. And like you said, its entire motivation this entire time that has been built up, not just by them, but by the UK and by the US, to take over the Middle East, it's been clear. Mao Zedong knew that as well, right? It's been clear, it's set in history. But they keep, like you said, deploying this narrative that is completely turning everything upside down. And also to your point about them critiquing China for not doing enough, whereas, like you said, Israel has the nuclear wars, and they are bullies in the truest sense. They are genocidal maniacs. Kris, I want to ask you, I want to ask you, what's your perspective on everything?
Wow, this is a big topic.
Question.
Yeah. I mean, it takes time to unpack. Well, first of all that you mentioned, it reminds me of this, is that how humans are politically organized. China is not, we don't have this tradition of exceptionalism. We don't think, okay, whatever, we're exceptional people. But really, Chinese socialism is a different kind of political organization that this government, whoever is representing the people, really cares about the well-being of the people. Whereas you look at the military industrial complex in the US, whether you look at other countries, for example, Iran. It's that I see that this politics is basically games for power and calculation everywhere. The people are working for their own selfish interest, probably not even for this nation, for his or her own nation, probably just for tribes, political tribes or clans, families, himself, whatever. So, but this is hijacked the people of the nation. I mean, if you look at Israel, what Netanyahu has been doing is definitely against the popular will of the Israeli citizens, or some of the Israeli citizens, yeah. And also, even you look at Iran, I mean, it's not a criticism against Iran. It's not saying, okay, Iran shouldn't resist or what, fight back. Iran is a sovereign country. When its sovereign right has been violated, of course it has its right to strike back. But given the fact that Iran has suffered this much, its leadership assassinated, Soleimani by Trump outside the airport, and ever since that, its nuclear scientists get assassinated, its IRGC high-ranking officials get assassinated. You started to wonder, okay, why is Iran infiltrated this much? What happens to the state apparatus? And then you have to draw this conclusion. Well, there must be moles within the state. There must be someone who collaborates with Mossad, with U.S. intelligence, and with some support from Iran itself. And then, and also, this goes back to the 1979 Islamic Revolution, where it's just basically how Iran as a state functions. So, I don't speak for all Chinese people, obviously. It's just me. I think Iran has a very big internal problem right now. If Iran fails to address this problem, it will suffer more defeats. And because it's not a coherent, united nation. It's some part of the nation, some part of the elite is actually actively working to undermine the security of the nation.
Okay, but so let's go back and let's look at this, because you're talking about something really important.
Yeah.
For 100 years, Zionism, the project, which is fascism, has been infiltrating everything. Mossad is the best in the world, right?
Yeah.
Of infiltration. I'm sure there is Mossad cells in China.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I'm sure, Zionism has infiltrated China. It's certainly infiltrated India. It's job for 100 years. So we're not talking about this happening just like whatever, just showed up today. No, this is a long project. And so to understand that in 1953, Iran was a socialist country.
Yeah.
The oil was being socialized for the people, and the United States came in and couped a democratically elected leader, inserted the king, and the revolution was to get rid of the king that the US had inserted. So I just needed to take this back a little further, because let's understand why the situation. And then it was Bibi wanting to get rid of Iran that put the sanctions, it's gonna have nuclear weapons. well, why is it wrong to have nuclear? Like Pakistan has nuclear weapons, India has nuclear. Like, why all of a sudden is it not okay for Iran to have nuclear weapons when Israel has them? Like who made up that rule, right? Where did that come from?
The big five.
Right, exactly. So who gets to decide, right? Who gets to decide who's weak and who's strong? Who gets to decide who can't take care of himself? I mean, China knew it needed nuclear weapons, right? Or it would be dead. So as soon as Libya got rid of their nuclear, okay, we'll be good. We'll get rid of our nuclear weapons. They're dead. There's no more Libya.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just kind of look at the question there right now. So Iran has been attacked with sanctions that have crushed it. I've been going to Iran since the 70s, and I've been going to Iran in the last 20 years, like over, every couple of years. Watching the sanctions crush the entire middle class of Iran has been heartbreaking. So let's not forget that the war on Iran has been going on for a very long time, but through sanctions. Sanctions are a violence, to me, almost as bad as a weapon. Okay, it's very horrible what it does to the people. So understanding what sanctions are, they're meant to squeeze the people so bad that they'll go against their government, right? So when you're questioning how this is happening inside of Iran, it's been squeezed to make room for these moles inside because nobody has anything.
Yes.
So that's a construction of imperialism.
Of course.
Okay, but that's why it's in there. It's why it was in there in Russia. It's like these moles are always there ready to take advantage of whoever they can. And when you keep squeezing, sanctions make society unhealthy. So the government will collapse. So imperialism can take over.
Yeah, but yes, it crushes the people, but ultimately, of course, it squeezes the nation. But it's not saying that the Iranians themselves are not, that the elites are not squeezing the people. They are squeezing the people. Like, if you talk about the IRGC is a corporation. It makes money out of sanctions. Well, and then it's precisely because the Khamenei, he wants to IRGC to take over the economic life of Iran, and of course it's squeezing the vested interest of the so-called secular elites. Okay, that they are not happy with each other. So of course there's a structural problem, and this structural problem is caused by global injustice that's perpetrated by the U.S. imperialism, but it's not a free pass for them to
No, it's not a free pass, but what I'm saying, it's constructed because of the sanctions.
Yeah.
The revolution, they wouldn't be able to do that if the sanctions weren't in place. There would be, it's like it feeds, always the sanctions feeds the person, it makes the person in power stronger instead of weaker, which becomes no different than BB funding Hamas, because I need my counterbalance there, right? Yes. So it's just, it's not separate, it's one.
Yeah.
And how they play together is important to understand.
Yeah. I mean, yes, of course. When we say, okay, we go back to the root of all problems, yes. But then there's also complexities involved in the process.
Oh, and all kinds of complexities.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And also what I think what I'm hearing you say is that China actually does have very high expectations and hopes for Iran. Like, China ultimately wants the best for Iran. China is able to see these complexities and these contradictions within Iran, but ultimately wants Iran to be a strong ally that opposes U.S. hegemony.
Well, I think that's why. It's because the only hope we have is to get in the way of U.S. hegemony, and whoever can be on the team for that is important to life on the planet as a citizen of the planet Earth. Without that, you've got a singularity, which is destruction to life. It's stupid. It just gets stupider. I mean, we see billionaires, you just get stupider. It's not a good thing. Empires are stupid. So any team member, it's not like you agree with all the things that all the team members do. It's that, you come together around a common alliance that is, we can't have a hegemony on the planet, or the people of the world will pay.
Absolutely.
And I think that's, and then inside of that, there's a gazillion complexities and things like I don't want to look at, and you know, that I don't have to fix. It's not mine. You know, it's like I have my own belly of the beast to worry about. But the fact that also, you know, in the empire, everybody in the empire thinks they get to solve every other country's problems from their seat in the U.S. empire, and that's a problem, which has been taught to them by decades of the U.S. empire saying all these things are bad in all these countries, so we have to fix them, instead of having any respect to sovereignty of countries and their peoples.
I think that is a very powerful note to end on, and I think you're completely correct, both of you, in always pointing out and being very precise what the real common enemy is. Thank you both so much for participating in this very juicy, very incredible conversation. I've learned so much from the both of you. And yeah, thank you so much for watching this episode of Roughly Chinese. See you next time.